Hello and welcome to the first case study in this series of videos on the archaeology of death and disease. This first case study discusses the so-called Plague of Athens, an as yet unidentified disease that shook classical Athens to its core. 5th century Athens is arguably the zenith of ancient Greek culture, and in many ways the plague played a big contribution to the eventual decline of the city as the most important state in ancient Greece. This plague occurred towards the end of the 5th century BC, or to be more precise, between 430 and 425 BC. It is said to have arrived in 430 BC, gone away, and then come back again between that year and 425 BC. This disease arrived during the Peloponnesian War, a Greek civil war against other Greeks. However, the roots of this war, and thus of the causes of the plague itself, lay somewhat earlier in a series of changes that took place during the late 6th and early 5th century BC. Therefore, in this video, I will summarise the period leading up to the plague and attempt to contextualise how and why it emerged in 430 BC. Many of the historical events described here are extremely complex. My aim is not to ignore this complexity, but to merely provide a background to the plague. Any of the events described here deserve their own videos, and that may end up being the case for one of my future series. In the meantime, please forgive what appears to be a superficial analysis here. Our aim is just to understand the plague and its setting. Beginning in the mid-6th century then, the Eastern Mediterranean was the home not only to Greek-speaking city-states like Athens, but also to various other ethnic groups, including the Persians, who came to control a vast empire through a process of conquest and invasion. The Persians had been gradually invading and conquering Greek-speaking lands from the mid-6th century onwards, and this included what was once called Asia Minor, an area which is now covered by Anatolia in modern Turkey. The Greek city-states of Asia Minor were all strung along the Mediterranean coastline of Turkey. Amongst them were cities such as Miletus, Priene, and Ephesus, well-known archaeological sites that can still be visited to this day. By 560 BC, Asia Minor was invaded by the Lydians, and their king Croesus took control of the Greek cities along the coast. Lydia was a vast kingdom that existed from about 1200 to 546 BC. By the 7th century, it covered most of Anatolia and had its capital at the site of Sardis. Yet Lydian control did not last long. Cyrus I, also known as Cyrus the Great of Persia, conquered both Lydia and Asia Minor, thus bringing the whole area into the Persian Empire. This was around 546 BC. Our main source on this period is Herodotus, who was himself born in Asia Minor and thus in the Persian Empire. While his hometown was Halicarnassus, which is modern-day Bodrum in Turkey, he ended up in Athens, where he wrote his book, simply called The Histories, in about 440 BC. But more on him later. The Greek cities under Persian control were each ruled by a satrap. a Persian word similar to our word governor or viceroy. To briefly summarise this rule for the purposes of our case study, the Persian control of the area led to an attempt to invade the island of Naxos. This was followed by the so-called Ionian Revolt, a short-lived rebellion by the Greek states of Asia Minor lasting from 499 to 493 BC. Although the intricacies of these events will not be described here in detail, these tensions form the contextual background to the rise of Athens as the main power in ancient Greece and also the wars with Persia. The Ionian Revolt involved help from other states, amongst which was Athens, and marching all the way to Sardis in 498, the allied Greek forces burnt the once Lydian capital to the ground. This is arguably the catalyst in what was to become a backwards and forwards between the Greeks and Persians in burning and sacking each other's cities. The final event in this cycle would be Alexander the Great's much later destruction of the great Persian city of Persepolis. Yet what is important for us here is that it is directly linked to the plague in Athens, because the burning of Sardis was one of the reasons for the Persian invasion of Greece. This invasion was led by two great kings of Persia, Darius I and his son Xerxes I. Both of these demanded submission from the Greek states, and Herodotus tells us that almost all the Greeks did so, except two, Athens and Sparta, the two protagonists of the later Peloponnesian War when the Plague of Athens occurred. Herodotus tells us that the Persian kings demanded earth and water, a request which indicated that the king owned everything around each city. According to Herodotus, the Spartans threw the Persian envoys into a well, while the Athenians threw their visiting envoys into a pit and told them to dig the earth out themselves. This refusal to kneel before the Persian king led to the Greco-Persian Wars. These lasted from 490 BC until around 469 or 466 BC, and saw many city-states fight together, including Athens and Sparta. A series of battles were fought during this period that have gone down as amongst the most famous battles in European history. They include the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC, which the Athenians won, and just as famous is the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC, where a small group of Spartans and others valiantly defended the pass that forms the main entry point to Greece from the north, and thus stalled the Persian advance. Their loss at this battle has been immortalised in a recent film. However, a further Greek defeat at the Battle of Artemisium in 480 BC then enabled the Persians to sack Athens and burn its temples, public buildings and houses to the ground. The Battle of Salamis followed soon after, again in the same year, but this time the Greeks were able to defeat the Persian army and begin a pushback towards the coast of Asia Minor. In 479 BC, the battles of Plataea and Mycale saw the Greeks destroy the Persian army and navy. This allowed the Greek city-states time to regroup. In 478 BC, they formed a league to defend Greece, which they called the Delian League. The historian Thucydides tells us that from the start, the aim was to seek revenge over the Persian destruction of many Greek cities, including Naxos, Eretria, and Athens. A large number of Greek city-states joined and paid money into a central kitty which was held on the island of Delos, the location of a pan-Hellenic sanctuary. At first, this was an organisation that was not controlled by any single state. However, it was led by the Athenians from the start, despite each member of the league receiving a single vote. Further battles were fought against the Persians, and the most famous is the Battle of Eurymedon in 469 or 466 BC. Yet at some point, the Athenians took control of the Delian League. In 454 BC, they moved the treasury from its neutral location on Delos to Athens itself. And these funds enabled Athens to acquire its own empire. Money from the Delian treasury was used to finance the construction of many of the monuments we associate with Athens today, especially those crowning its Acropolis that looms over the city. The movement of the treasury was an act that undoubtedly led to the tensions between Athens and Sparta and the eventual Peloponnesian War. This war lasted from 431 to 404 BC, and the start of this civil war forms the very period during which the Plague of Athens occurred. The main source on this is Thucydides, and his account will form the subject of the next video, where we will discuss the arrival of the plague, its symptoms, and consequences. If you enjoyed this video, then stay tuned because more is to come.